The rope creaked in the wind. A young girl dangled from the oak, her lips blue, her eyes barely open. Above her head swung a board scorched with 3 words, "White men never forget." A lone rider reined in, heart hammering. Crows scattered into the sky, shrieking like omens. He leapt from his horse, knife flashing against the knot, praying he wasn't too late. Her body dropped heavy into his arms. For a breathless moment, nothing moved. Then a cough tore through the silence. Someone wanted her dead. Someone wanted the world to see her hang. And now, by saving her, he had chosen a path no man could turn back from. Welcome to WestDream Tales, where the untold West lives again. Subscribe and ride with us into legends of love, survival, and fate. The first light crawled across Sangre Mesa like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Frost clung to wire fences and dead grass cracked under hooves. Jack Monroe rode alone, hat brim pulled low against the bitter morning wind, scanning the ridge for a stray calf that had wandered in the night. At 35, Jack carried the weight of too many goodbyes. His wife Sarah had died 3 winters past, taken by fever that no amount of prayer could break. The ranch felt hollow without her laughter echoing through the rooms. Most days, he worked until exhaustion claimed him, anything to avoid the silence. The gelding beneath him was steady, reliable traits Jack valued above all else. Together they had patrolled these boundaries for years, reading the land's moods like scripture. Today felt different, wrong. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made the horse shy. Not the clean smell of snow or sage, but something darker. The gelding's ears stiffened, nostrils flaring. From the hollow of Dry Creek came a sound Jack could not name. Not bird, not coyote, a broken thread of air, as if the earth itself sighed in pain. He pressed the horse downhill toward the grove of ancient oaks. These trees had stood sentinel long before the first white settlers arrived, their gnarled branches holding secrets older than memory. Sarah used to say they whispered stories to anyone brave enough to listen. Shadows crowded the grove like silent witnesses. Then the sky erupted, a murder of crows lifting from a single tree, their wings beating against the dawn like torn fabric. Their cries pierced the air, urgent and accusatory. Beneath the largest oak hung a figure. Jack's blood turned to ice water. A wooden placard banged against bark with each gust of wind. "White men never forget." The letters were burned deep into the wood, meant to scar more than just timber. This was a message written in cruelty, designed to terrorize. For a heartbeat, Jack thought he had stumbled on a corpse left to rot as a warning. The body hung limp, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then he saw it, the faintest twitch of a finger, the barely perceptible scrape of boot leather against bark. Someone was still alive. He dropped from the saddle, boots hitting frozen ground hard. His knife was already in his hand, honed sharp from years of ranch work. The girl's head lolled forward, hair matted with dust and dried blood. Her lips had turned the blue-gray of hypothermia. The hemp rope was thick, professional. This wasn't some hasty lynching born of drunken rage. Someone had planned this execution with military precision. Jack clawed at the knot, bark tearing his palms raw. His fingers were numb with cold, clumsy with urgency. The rope resisted, tightened by the weight it had carried through the night. Precious seconds ticked by as he sawed at the fibers. At last the rope gave way. Both bodies tumbled into the dirt, the girl's limp form and Jack's own as he caught her fall. She hit hard, but air rushed back into her chest. A cough tore through her throat, raw as a death rattle, but beautifully, impossibly alive. Jack pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. They're faint as a whisper, erratic as a broken clock, but undeniably present. Life still flickered in this broken form. He studied her face in the growing light. Apache, probably no more than 18 years old. High cheekbones marked with old scars. Hands that spoke of hard work, harder times. Someone had left her to swing as a warning to her people, or perhaps to any white man foolish enough to show mercy. Not a quiet execution, but a message written in flesh and fear. The kind of statement that echoed across territories for generations. Jack gathered her up, struck by how light she was. Too light, like a child who had lived too many winters on too little bread. Her wrist carried angry rope burns, some old, some fresh. This wasn't her first encounter with a noose. He pulled his trail coat over her shoulders, heavy wool that still held his body's warmth. The horse skittered at the smell of blood and fear, but yielded to his steady hand. Jack had gentled many frightened creatures over the years. This would be no different. He lifted the girl as carefully as he could, settling her across the saddle before mounting behind. Her head fell against his chest, and he could feel each shallow breath. Every rise and fall was a small victory against death. The oak shrank in the distance as they rode toward home, but the image burned into Jack's memory. The placard swaying in the wind, the rope coiled in the dirt like a sleeping snake, the crows that had scattered but would surely return. Every sway of the horse reminded him that she still breathed, however shallowly. That was reason enough to keep riding, reason enough to risk whatever came next. By the time they reached the gate of Dry Creek Ranch, the sky had opened into a pale blaze of winter sunlight. Frost steamed off the corrals like breath from sleeping giants. The barn loomed silent and dark, its weathered boards holding the memory of better times. He nudged the horse through the gate and swung down with her still in his arms. She weighed nothing, but somehow felt heavier than any burden he'd ever carried, because now he was responsible for this life, this choice, this moment that would change everything. Inside his small cabin, Jack laid her on his bed, the same bed where Sarah had drawn her last breath 3 years ago. The girl's face turned toward the window, as though searching for sky, even in unconsciousness. The welt across her neck shone purple and swollen, a collar of cruelty that would mark her forever. Jack worked without words, moving with the careful efficiency of a man accustomed to tending wounded animals. Water warmed on the wood stove while he tore strips from an old flour sack. His hand, scarred from years of ranch work, were surprisingly gentle as they cleaned her throat and dabbed at the rope burns. Her body remained still, but her hands clenched faintly at his touch, proof that pain still belonged to her, that some part of her mind remained aware. He loosened her grip and placed a wool blanket between her fingers, something soft to anchor her to the world of the living. For a long moment he stood over her, listening. The cabin ticked with the slow language of settling wood, a rhythm as familiar as his own heartbeat. Her breathing rose and fell with it, uneven but refusing to stop. Each breath was an act of defiance against those who had tried to silence her forever. He brewed willow bark tea, its bitter scent filling the air. Sarah had taught him this remedy during the early years of their marriage, back when she still believed her healing touch could save anything. The irony wasn't lost on him, using his dead wife's medicine to save another woman's life. Lifting the girl's head carefully, he touched the liquid to her lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but a single swallow slid down her throat. Progress, however small. Then came a whisper. Not English, not Spanish, not any tongue he recognized. Perhaps a name spoken in delirium. Perhaps a curse aimed at those who had wronged her. Perhaps a prayer to whatever god still listened to the desperate. Jack set the cup aside and spoke low and steady. You're safe now. Even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if they were true. Safety was a luxury neither of them could afford, not with that placard swinging from the hanging tree. Her eyes cracked open for just a moment, dark as river stones, sharp despite her weakness. They locked onto his face, measuring him with the wariness of prey that has learned to recognize predators. Then the lids fell again, leaving him alone with the weight of her trust. Jack straightened, bones creaking from the morning's exertions. He took the rope from his saddlebag, the noose that had nearly ended her life. His hands worked automatically, tying a knot in the middle, a reminder that death had come close and somehow been turned away. Outside, the prairie wind rattled through dry reeds and set the barn door creaking on its hinges. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer rang against an anvil, proof that the world carried on despite the morning's drama. But here in this cabin, time had narrowed to the space between heartbeats. Jack Monroe, widower and soldier of forgotten wars, now stood guard over a girl who should have been dead. And somewhere out there, the men who had tried to kill her were discovering that their message had gone undelivered. They would come looking. It was only a matter of when. That night, Jack bedded down in the barn, spreading his old army blanket across fresh straw. He kept his rifle close, loaded and ready. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of swaying trees and the sound of wings taking flight. Before dawn, The gelding stamped nervously in its stall. Jack rose instantly, senses alert. Something had disturbed the horse's rest. He slipped out into the gray pre-dawn light and crouched low, studying the ground. Their fresh boot prints in the frost-softened earth near the barn. The prints were narrow and sharp, made by military-issue cavalry boots. Their edges were crisp, made only hours ago. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran down Jack's spine. They had found the ranch. They were already watching. He followed the tracks carefully, noting how they circled the property line. Whoever had been here was thorough, professional. They had taken stock of his defenses, counted his horses, measured the distance between buildings. This was reconnaissance, not a casual visit. Jack rose slowly, scanning the tree line where darkness still clung to the cottonwoods. No movement, no glint of metal or bit leather, but he could feel eyes on him, hidden in shadows he couldn't penetrate. Back in the cabin, the girl had not moved from where he'd left her, but her dark eyes followed him as he entered, as if she could sense the shift in atmosphere, the tension that came with being hunted. Jack kept his voice calm and steady. "You're safe here," he said again, but outside, those boot prints whispered otherwise. Safety was an illusion as thin as morning frost. The morning brought trouble riding hard down the ranch road. Hoofbeats clattered in disciplined rhythm, not the chaotic gallop of outlaws, but the measured pace of military training. Jack tightened his jaw and stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. A man in cavalry blues reined in at the gate, dust streaking his coat but brass buttons gleaming in the sunlight. Captain's bars gleamed on his shoulders. Behind him, two troopers sat their mounts with the easy confidence of men accustomed to authority. Their rifles lay across their saddles, not aimed but available. The officer dismounted with practiced ease, his movements economical and threatening. He carried a folded paper sealed with red wax, official business that brooked no argument. His eyes measured Jack the way a hawk measures prey, calculating distance, wind speed, the likelihood of escape. "Name's Captain Rowan," he announced, voice carrying across the yard like a challenge. "Third Frontier Cavalry. We're tracking an Apache fugitive who escaped custody yesterday morning." He broke the wax seal and held out the paper with ceremony that felt rehearsed. Jack read the warrant carefully, taking his time despite the officer's obvious impatience. The name written there was Niley, age approximately 18 years, height 5 feet, 2 inches. Distinguishing marks rope scars on wrists and neck. The description fit the girl lying in his bed with uncomfortable precision. Accused of murder of Private Thomas Wheeler, accused of desertion from protective custody, accused of inciting rebellion among reservation populations, by order of territorial command to be hanged on sight. Jack kept his face carefully blank as he read. Years of poker and army camps had taught him to hide his thoughts behind a mask of studied indifference. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," he said finally, handing the warrant back. His voice carried the weight of quiet certainty, the tone of a man stating simple fact. Captain Rowan studied him with narrowed eyes, clearly measuring truth against necessity. The officer was younger than Jack by a decade, probably fresh from some Eastern military academy where they taught tactics but not wisdom. His uniform was too clean, his bearing too rigid for a man who truly understood the frontier. "You're sure about that?" Rowan pressed, stepping closer. His boots crunched on the gravel, each step deliberate as a threat. "This fugitive is considered extremely dangerous. She's killed before." Jack didn't move from the porch, but his grip on the rifle shifted slightly. "Like I said, Captain, nobody's passed this way." For a tense moment, silence stretched between them like a wire under tension. The troopers behind Rowan shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. The morning air felt thick with the potential for violence. Then Rowan smiled, the expression devoid of warmth or humor. "Well, then you won't mind if we take a look around, will you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a statement of intent wrapped in the thin veneer of courtesy. Jack stepped forward, blocking the path to his door without seeming to move aggressively. His boots found solid purchase on the porch boards. "This is private property, Captain. My property." The words came low and deliberate, carrying the weight of iron. "You're welcome to ride the perimeter, check the pastures, but the house and barn belong to me. Nothing in there that concerns the army. Rowan's smile widened, showing teeth like a predator sensing weakness. Is that so? He glanced toward the barn as if calculating distances and angles of attack. The two troopers spread out slightly, a movement so subtle it might have been accidental. But Jack recognized the positioning they were preparing to flank him. Without appearing to hurry, Jack stepped sideways and knocked over a lantern hanging from the porch rail. Glass shattered against the gravel. Kerosene splashing across the dry hay scattered near the barn door. Flame licked hungrily at the tinder. The troopers cursed and spurred their horses away from the sudden blaze. Rowan himself jumped back, batting at sparks that threatened his uniform. By the time the small fire had been stamped out with boots and saddle blankets, Jack stood calm and unmoved on his porch. His rifle now rested openly across his chest. No longer a casual accessory, but a clear statement of intent. The message was unmistakable. This ranch was no place for uninvited guests. Accidents happen, Jack said mildly, as if discussing the weather. Especially when too many people crowd into small spaces. Captain Rowan's face had darkened with frustrated rage. He remounted his horse with sharp, jerky movements that spoke of barely controlled temper. You'll regret protecting criminals. Monroe, he spat. The use of Jack's name was meant to be intimidating proof that the army knew exactly who they were dealing with. When we catch her, and we will, anyone who helped will answer for it. Jack met his glare without flinching. Captain, the only thing I'll regret is not offering you coffee before you rode out. His tone was perfectly polite, which somehow made the dismissal even more pointed. Rowan wheeled his horse hard enough to make it dance sideways. This isn't over, he promised. The three soldiers rode off, leaving churned earth and the lingering smell of smoke in their wake. Jack watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge, then counted slowly to 100 before allowing himself to relax. Inside the cabin, he found the girl Nayeli awake and staring through a crack in the curtain. She had heard every word of the confrontation. Her dark eyes burned with something that wasn't quite gratitude, but might have been respect. Jack nodded once. Man to woman, survivor to survivor. I gave them nothing, he said simply. She said nothing in return, only reached for the edge of the blanket with fingers that trembled slightly. Her knuckles were pale where they gripped the wool. The silence between them carried more weight than words could bear. Jack moved about the cabin with deliberate normalcy, setting his rifle back in its stand and straightening the furniture that no one had disturbed. Every movement was designed to project calm, to show that the morning's drama was already fading into routine. But he folded Rowan's warrant carefully and tucked it under a pile of ranch ledgers. Every soldier in the territory would soon know her face, her name, her alleged crimes. The net was already closing. The next days passed in careful routine. Jack worked the fences and tended his small herd while Nayeli slowly regained her strength. She moved about the cabin like a ghost at first, silent and watchful. But gradually, life returned to her movements. On the third evening, Jack returned from checking the water holes to find charcoal marks on the barn wall. She had drawn something there with a burned stick from the fire, an image that made him freeze in recognition. A bird, wings spread wide, seemed to rise from flames that engulfed its body. Every line was precise, purposeful. The creature's eyes held intelligence, defiance, pain transformed into power. Jack stared at the drawing, memory stirring. His father's journal, the one he'd carried through 3 different wars, contained the same symbol. Sketched in faded ink on a page of hand-drawn maps, accompanied by notes in his father's careful script. The firebird rises not despite the flames, but because of them. What destroys the weak makes the strong eternal. His father had died when Jack was 12, killed in a skirmish with Comanche raiders. The journal was all that remained of the man's thoughts, his understanding of a world caught between old ways and new. Nayeli noticed his stare and turned away, shoulders stiffening with defensive pride. She had been telling her story without words, sharing something sacred with a stranger who had earned the privilege through mercy. Jack approached the drawing slowly, studying each line. My father drew this same bird, he said quietly. Never understood what it meant. She glanced back at him, surprise flickering across her features. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than before, though still rough from the rope's damage. It is not just a bird, she said carefully, as if choosing each word from a limited supply. It is the spirit that refuses to die. The part of us that grows stronger when the world tries to burn it away? Jack nodded, understanding finally clicking into place. What happened to your family? The question hung in the evening air, like smoke from a dying fire. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then words began to flow, halting at first, then gathering force like water breaking through a dam. They came in the night, soldiers like the ones who were here. Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, touching the rope scars. Said we had stolen cattle, said we had killed their men, said we were planning war. Jack waited, letting the silence speak when words failed her. We were farmers, she continued, voice gaining strength. We grew corn and beans. We raised horses. We wanted only to be left alone. But the territory was shrinking, caught between the hunger of settlers and the resistance of native peoples. Peace was a luxury neither side could afford. They hanged my father first, made us watch. Her voice didn't break, but something in her eyes flickered like a candle in wind. Then my mother, then my brothers, one by one, until only I remained. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why did they spare you? They didn't. Her laugh held no humor, only the bitter recognition of survival. I was supposed to die with them, but the rope was old. It broke just as the darkness took me. She had awakened hours later in a mass grave, surrounded by the bodies of her family, wounded, traumatized, but impossibly alive. I crawled out and ran. For days I ran, eating roots and drinking from streams. Her fingers traced the charcoal lines of the Firebird. But they found me again, put me in their prison, said I would hang proper this time. The rest Jack could piece together her escape, the pursuit, the second hanging that he had interrupted. 2 failed executions had given birth to a legend, the Apache girl who could not be killed. They call me witch now, she said with grim satisfaction. They are afraid. And the murder charge, Jack asked. Her eyes hardened. I killed the guard who tried to rape me, put a knife in his belly while he tore my clothes. She met Jack's gaze steadily. If that makes me a murderer, then I am proud to be guilty. Jack felt no judgment, only a deep recognition of necessity. He had killed men in war, in self-defense, in the gray territories where survival mattered more than law. You did what you had to do, he said simply. Something shifted in her expression, then a wall crumbling, a door opening just enough to let light through. That night, as if summoned by their conversation, the rattlesnake came. Jack was splitting cedar posts in the pasture when he heard the warning rattle. The sound froze his blood dry. Sharp, the musical announcement of death. The snake coiled in the tall grass near his feet, head raised and ready to strike. 6 feet of diamond-patterned muscle, thick as a man's arm. Its eyes were black beads fixed on his leg, calculating distance and timing. Jack tried to step back slowly, but his boot caught on a root. He stumbled, and the snake struck like lightning. Fangs punched through his jeans and into the meat of his calf. Venom burned into his bloodstream like liquid fire. He staggered, axe dropping with a dull thud. The world tilted sideways as poison raced toward his heart. Then Niley was there, appearing as if conjured from thin air. She threw herself to the ground beside him, not hesitating despite the snake's continued presence. Her hunting knife flashed, severing the rattler's head in a single stroke. Without pausing, she pressed her lips to the wound and began sucking out the venom. Her tears fell hot on his skin as she worked, spitting poison and blood into the dirt. Again and again she repeated the process, her own life at risk from the toxins. Don't die, she gasped between efforts. Please don't die. Not you. Her voice cracked with desperation, and in that break lay all the grief she had carried in silence, all the people she had lost, all the kindness she had been denied. Jack fought the darkness clouding his vision. Her hands worked frantically, tearing strips from her shirt to bind the wound. He could feel her heartbeat against his arm, rapid as a frightened bird's. Through the haze of fever and pain, he realized something profound had shifted between them. She was no longer the rescued victim, and he no longer just the reluctant savior. They were 2 people who had found something worth fighting for in each other. The fever lasted 3 days. Jack lay delirious on his bed while Nayeli kept constant vigil, cooling his burning skin with damp cloths and forcing willow bark tea between his lips. She slept only in brief snatches, always startling awake at any change in his breathing. On the morning of the fourth day, the fever broke. Jack opened his eyes to find her asleep in the chair beside the bed, hair tangled and face streaked with exhaustion. Her hand still rested on his arm, as if guarding his pulse through the long night. He studied her face in the dawn light, the high cheekbones marked by old scars, the full lips that had saved his life by drawing poison from his blood. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty forged by hardship and tempered by loss. He moved his fingers slowly, barely brushing her knuckles. She startled awake instantly, eyes wide with alarm that softened into relief when she saw him watching her. "The poison is gone," she said, voice hoarse from days of worry. Her hand moved to his forehead, checking for fever with a touch that lingered longer than necessary. "Thanks to you," he whispered. His throat felt raw, as if he had been screaming in his sleep. For a moment they simply looked at each other, really looked, as if seeing beyond surface appearances for the first time. He saw not the hunted Apache fugitive, but a woman who had risked everything to save him. She saw not the white rancher, but the man who had chosen mercy over safety. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Then Nayeli leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that tasted of salt tears and desperate gratitude. It was not born of passion alone, but of recognition, two souls who had found their match in the crucible of survival. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," she whispered, though her eyes said the opposite. "Every day I stay puts you in more danger." Jack's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Let them come," he said quietly. "I'm tired of being alone." From that day forward, the ranch felt transformed. Nayeli moved through the rooms with growing confidence, mending clothes and tending the vegetable garden that had gone wild since Sarah's death. She sang sometimes while she worked old songs in her native tongue that filled the empty spaces with haunting beauty. Jack found himself looking forward to evening conversations by the fire, learning about her people's ways and sharing stories of his own past. She was fascinated by his books, tracing letters she couldn't read with fingers that had never held a pen. He began teaching her, watching her face light up as words took shape and meaning. But the shadow of pursuit never fully lifted. At dusk each day, Jack climbed the ridge with his spyglass, counting the cavalry fires that dotted the horizon. Sometimes they were distant, mere pinpricks of light. Other times they burned close enough that he could smell the smoke. Captain Rowan had not given up the hunt. If anything, his efforts had intensified. One evening in late autumn, Jack counted 18 separate fires arranged in a wide semicircle. The net was tightening. Soon there would be nowhere left to run. That night, he found Nayeli in the barn, adding new details to her Firebird drawing. The image had grown more complex over the week's flames that seemed to dance, feathers that caught phantom light, eyes that held the wisdom of ages. "They're coming," he said without preamble. She nodded, not looking up from her work. "I know. I can feel their eyes on the wind." Jack moved to stand beside her, studying the drawing that had become both artwork and prophecy. "We could run. Tonight, before they close the circle." "Where would we go?" she asked quietly. "There is nowhere left that their law does not reach." Jack knew she was right. The frontier was shrinking daily, carved up by railroads and telegraph lines. Soon there would be no wild places left, no refuge for those who lived outside society's rules. "Then we make our stand here," he said. His voice carried the finality of a man who had made his choice. Nayeli turned to face him, charcoal smudging her fingertips. "You would die for me," she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of wonder. "I would live for you," he corrected. "That's harder." She stepped into his arms then, and they held each other in the lamplight. Outside, the wind rattled the barn doors and carried the distant sound of military drums. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, they had found something the cavalry could never take away. The Firebird watched over them, wings spread wide, rising eternal from the flames that would have consumed lesser spirits. In its eyes burned the promise that some things love, courage, the refusal to surrender, could never truly die. They would face the morning together, whatever it might bring. And in that unity, they had already won the only victory that mattered. Before dawn broke gray over Sangre Mesa. Jack and Nayeli prepared for what might be their final journey together. They worked in practiced silence, every movement economical and purposeful. Jack saddled the gelding with extra care, checking every strap and buckle twice. He tied down bedrolls, ammunition, and enough food for a week's hard travel. Water filled 2 canteens more weight, but they might not find clean streams where they were heading. Nayeli filled a small leather pouch with medicinal herbs she had gathered from the hills. Her fingers moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to pack light and fast. Everything she owned in the world fit into a bundle smaller than a man's fist. They left the cabin dark and cold, fire banked to nothing but ash. The rooms that had sheltered them through the autumn months felt suddenly hollow. Only the firebird remained on the barn wall, charcoal wings spread wide in silent benediction. The eastern sky was just beginning to blush with false dawn when they rode out. Jack knew every trail for 50 miles, every waterhole and hidden canyon, but the cavalry would know them too, and they had the advantage of numbers. They rode hard across the mesa, pushing the gelding to its limits. The horse was strong and willing, but it carried double weight across terrain that punished every misstep. Behind them, the ranch grew small and distant, a collection of buildings that had briefly been home. By mid-morning, the sun had burned away the morning mist. Heat shimmered off the broken ground, turning distant objects into wavering mirages. Jack's shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and the horse's flanks were dark with moisture. That's when they heard it, the rhythmic thunder of many horses moving fast. Jack twisted in the saddle, shading his eyes against the glare. On the horizon, a dust cloud boiled up from the earth like smoke from a grass fire. Within that cloud, he could make out the dark shapes of mounted men. 18 riders, maybe more, spread out in a wide line that stretched across the plain. Captain Rowan had committed his entire troop to the pursuit. This was no longer just a manhunt, but a military operation. "How far to the river?" Nayeli asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Jack calculated distances and terrain in his head. 2 hours hard riding, maybe less. The Sangre River cut a deep gorge through the Badlands, its waters red with iron and clay. Beyond it lay a maze of canyons and mesas where a small group could lose itself for months. If they could reach it, the gelding felt the urgency in Jack's heels and stretched into a full gallop. Its hooves drummed against hard-packed earth, each stride eating up precious yards. But the cavalry horses were fresh, and their riders could change mounts from the remuda. The chase became a race against time and endurance. Miles blurred past in a haze of dust and desperate speed. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a furnace that seared their lungs. Behind them, the cavalry gradually closed the distance. What had been a distant dust cloud was now individual riders, their blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. Jack could see sunlight glinting off rifle barrels and polished brass. Shots began cracking across the plain, long-range attempts that whistled overhead or kicked up dirt fountains nearby. One bullet sliced through the air close enough to Nayeli's cheek that she felt its passage. Another struck the saddle horn, showering them with splinters of leather and wood. The Sangre River came into view at last, a silver ribbon cutting through red stone. The old timber bridge stretched across the gorge, weathered planks that had seen better decades. It was their only way across, and it looked fragile as spun glass from this distance. Jack spurred the gelding toward the bridge approach. The horse's breath came in great gasps, foam flecking its muzzle. Behind them, the cavalry was close enough now that individual voices carried on the wind. "There, the bridge. Don't let them cross. Take them alive if possible." The gelding's hooves struck the first planks with hollow drum beats. The bridge swayed under their weight, ancient timbers creaking ominously. Below, the river rushed through its rocky channel 50 feet down. Halfway across, Jack felt the punch of lead between his shoulder blades. The impact drove him forward against the saddle horn, breath exploding from his lungs. Blood spread across his shirt in a widening stain. He slumped sideways, rein slipping from nerveless fingers. The world tilted as consciousness flickered like a candle in wind. Nayeli screamed, her arms wrapping around him before he could fall. "Jack, stay with me." Her voice seemed to come from very far away. The gelding staggered, confused by the shift in weight. Behind them, more shots cracked across the gorge. Wood splintered around them as bullets found the bridge's support beams. A rifle ball struck the main beam with explosive force. The entire structure shuddered, planks buckling upward, ancient nails pulled free with shrieking protests. Jack tried to speak, to tell her to save herself, but blood filled his mouth. The bridge gave one final, groaning complaint. Then the world fell away beneath them. Horse, man, and woman plunged toward the rushing water below. The river opened like a mouth, ready to swallow them whole. In that moment of falling, time seemed suspended. Nayeli's arms tightened around Jack's waist. Her voice rose in a wordless cry, not of fear, but of defiance. If they were to die, they would die together. The water hit them like a physical blow, cold as winter and twice as merciless. The current seized them instantly, tearing them apart despite Nayeli's grip. Jack sank like a stone, the bullet wound stealing his strength, but Nayeli dove after him, lungs burning as she fought the river's pull. Her hands found his collar, his shirt, any part of him she could grasp. She kicked upward with desperate fury, refusing to let the water claim him. The river carried them through rapids that smashed them against submerged rocks. Pain exploded through Jack's ribs as stone met flesh. But somehow, impossibly, they stayed together. At last the current threw them against a gravel bar in calmer water. Nayeli hauled Jack up onto the bank, both of them coughing up river water and blood. Her own body was battered and bleeding, but she ignored her injuries. She pressed her palm against the bullet hole in his back, trying to stop the bleeding. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and persistent. Jack's eyes opened, glazed with pain but still aware. The bridge, he gasped. Above them, smoke rose from the collapsed timber. The cavalry would have to find another way across hours of delay that might save their lives. "Don't talk," Nayeli whispered, tears mixing with river water on her face. "Save your strength." But Jack gripped her wrist with fading strength. "Listen to me. There's a cabin, 2 miles downstream, hidden in the rocks." His voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah and I used to go there." His eyes closed, and for a terrifying moment Nayeli thought she had lost him. Then his chest rose in a shallow breath. Still alive, still fighting. She looked around desperately, taking stock of their situation. They were on the far side of the gorge, temporarily safe from pursuit. But Jack was badly wounded, and night was coming fast. The temperature would drop below freezing once the sun set. Without shelter and warmth, they would both die within hours. Nayeli made her decision. She stripped off her outer shirt and pressed it against Jack's wound, tying it tight with strips of cloth. Then she got her arms under his shoulders and began the agonizing process of moving him. 2 miles downstream, hidden in the rocks. She held on to those words like a prayer. The journey became a nightmare of pain and exhaustion. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness as she dragged him along the riverbank. Sometimes he could walk a few steps with her support. More often, she carried his full weight. The sun set in a blaze of red that painted the canyon walls like blood. Temperature plummeted as darkness claimed the gorge. Nayeli's breath came in visible puffs, and ice began forming at the river's edge. Just when she thought her strength would fail completely, she saw a dark opening in the rock face, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The cabin Jack had mentioned was little more than a cave with a wooden door. But inside, miracle of miracles, there were supplies, blankets wrapped in oilcloth, canned food, a small store of firewood. Jack and his late wife had prepared this place as a retreat from the world. Nayeli got a fire going with trembling fingers. The flames cast dancing shadows on stone walls as warmth began to fill the small space. She wrapped Jack in every blanket she could find, then examined his wound by firelight. The bullet had passed through cleanly, a blessing that might save his life, but he had lost too much blood, and infection was always a danger. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from a bottle Sarah had left behind. For 3 days, Jack hovered between life and death. Fever racked his body while Nayeli fought to keep him alive. She forced water and thin broth between his lips. She changed his bandages and whispered prayers in 2 languages. On the 4th morning, his eyes opened clear and focused. Nayeli. Her name on his lips was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She collapsed beside him, exhaustion finally claiming her. "I thought I had lost you," she sobbed. "I thought I was alone again." Jack's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "Not without you." Outside, as snow began to fall the first storm of winter, they were trapped in the canyon until spring. But somehow, that felt like salvation rather than imprisonment. The world could rage and hunt above them. Down here, they had found their sanctuary. Winter held the canyon in its grip for 4 long months. Snow piled deep on the rim above while the river ran black and swift below. In their hidden refuge, Jack and Nayeli built a life from necessity and love. Jack's wound healed slowly but surely under Nayeli's careful tending. The bullet had missed his vital organs, though it would leave him with a permanent scar and a slight limp. Small prices to pay for life itself. As his strength returned, he took over the heavier tasks. He reinforced their shelter, built proper furniture from driftwood, and set snares for rabbits along the game trails. Nayeli gathered edible plants and roots, supplementing their diet with knowledge passed down through generations. The long winter nights were filled with stories shared by firelight. Jack told her about his childhood on a struggling farm in Missouri, about the war that had taken his youth, about Sarah and the dreams they had shared. Nayeli spoke of her people's traditions, their seasonal migrations, the sacred places where earth touched sky. They learned each other's languages, trading words like precious gifts. Jack's Apache was halting but earnest. Nayeli's English grew more confident each day. In the space between languages, they discovered forms of communication that needed no words at all. One evening in the deepest part of winter, as wind howled through the canyon like the voices of spirits, Nayeli made an announcement that changed everything. "I am carrying your child," she said simply. Jack looked up from the fire he was tending, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Are you certain?" She placed his hand on her still flat belly. "The firebird told me in a dream. She will be strong like her parents." Jack smiled despite his concerns about bringing a child into their dangerous world. "A daughter," Nayeli confirmed with certainty that brooked no argument. "She will carry both our worlds in her heart." As spring approached and the snow began to melt, they made plans for the future. The canyon would not remain safe forever. Eventually, someone would discover their hiding place. But for now, they had time. Time to prepare, to gather strength, to ready themselves for whatever came next. Jack began scouting the surrounding area, mapping escape routes and identifying resources. There were other canyons, other hidden places where a small family might disappear. The frontier was vast, and somewhere in its emptiness lay the possibility of peace. Nayeli's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring months. She grew rounder and more radiant, her face losing the gaunt hardness that hunger and fear had carved there. Jack had never seen anything more beautiful than the sight of her hands cradling their unborn child. As summer arrived, they made the decision to establish a more permanent home. The cave had served its purpose, but a growing family needed space and security. They found the perfect spot 3 miles upstream, a natural meadow surrounded by protective cliffs, with fresh water and good soil. Jack began construction of a proper cabin while Nayeli planted a garden with seeds saved from their meager supplies. Corn, beans, and squash, the 3 sisters that had sustained her people for countless generations. By midsummer, green shoots were pushing through rich earth. Their daughter was born on a night when stars seemed close enough to touch. Jack delivered the baby himself, his hands shaking with awe and terror. When he placed the tiny, perfect child in Nayeli's arms, both parents wept with joy. They named her Elena Light in Spanish, a bridge between their different worlds. She had Jack's green eyes and Nayeli's dark hair, skin that spoke of mixed heritage without shame. From her first breath, she seemed to belong to both peoples and neither, a new creation born of love. Elena grew strong and curious, tottering around the cabin on unsteady legs and babbling in a mixture of English and Apache. Jack taught her to ride before she could properly walk. Nayeli sang her the old songs and told her stories of the firebird. Their small paradise felt complete, but the outside world had not forgotten them. Captain Rowan, now a major, had never given up the hunt. His superiors might have written off the case, but for him it had become a personal obsession. The Apache woman who could not be killed. The rancher who had chosen love over law. They represented everything that challenged his vision of frontier justice. In the 3rd summer after Elena's birth, Rowan finally found them. A Navajo tracker, desperate for army pay to feed his starving family, had followed old signs through the canyons. The reward money would buy food for months. Jack spotted the dust of approaching riders from his lookout post on the rim. 12 men this time, a smaller but more experienced force. Rowan had learned from his previous failures. There was no time for elaborate escape plans. Jack ran back to the cabin, where Nayeli was teaching Elena to weave grass into simple patterns. The peaceful domestic scene broke his heart even as it strengthened his resolve. "They've found us," he said quietly. Nayeli looked up from her daughter's small hands, understanding immediately. She had always known this day would come. Her only surprise was that it had taken so long. "How many?" she asked. "A dozen, maybe more." They moved with practiced efficiency, gathering essential supplies into travel packs. Elena, sensing the tension, began to cry. Nayeli scooped her up, murmuring soothing words that couldn't quite hide her own fear. But as they prepared to flee once again, Jack made a decision that surprised them both. He set down his pack and reached for his rifle. "No more running," he said firmly. "This is our home, our daughter's home. We make our stand here." Nayeli stared at him, recognizing the futility of resistance. "Jack, there are too many. They will kill us all." "Maybe," he admitted, "but Elena deserves better than a life spent looking over her shoulder." He checked his weapons with the calm efficiency of a man who had faced death many times before. "Besides, I'm tired of giving ground to men like Rowan." The sound of horses grew louder as the soldiers approached their hidden valley. Soon, voices would echo off the canyon walls. The final confrontation was at hand. Nayeli made her own choice then. She placed Elena in her wooden cradle and picked up the hunting rifle Jack had taught her to use. If they were going to die, they would die together. If they were going to fight, they would fight as one. "The firebird rises," she said quietly. "It does not bow to men who mistake cruelty for strength." Jack smiled at her words, remembering the charcoal drawing on his barn wall so long ago. The image that had become prophetic wings spread wide, rising from flames that would consume lesser spirits. Outside, Major Rowan's voice carried on the afternoon air. "Jack Monroe, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and the woman and child won't be harmed." It was a lie. Of course, Rowan had not spent 3 years hunting them to show mercy at the end, but it was the kind of lie that lets civilized men sleep at night. Jack stepped onto the cabin's small porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. Elena's cries had subsided to whimpers as Nayeli held her close. The family presented a united front against the world's judgment. "Major Rowan," Jack called back, "you're a long way from your post. Don't your superiors have better use for your time?" Rowan emerged from the tree line, flanked by his men. He was older now, gray threading through his hair and lines etched deep around his eyes. The years of obsession had aged him beyond his natural span. 3 years, Monroe," he said, voice carrying across the meadow. 3 years you've harbored a known fugitive. 3 years of making a mockery of military justice. "Justice," Jack laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You call it justice to hang a woman for defending herself. I call it law," Rowan replied coldly. "Something you've forgotten in your time playing house with a savage." The slur hit its target. Jack's knuckles whitened on his rifle grip. But before he could respond, Nayeli stepped out beside him. She carried Elena on her hip, the child's presence a silent reproach to the armed men facing them. When she spoke, her voice carried the dignity of queens and the fury of storms. "I am Nayeli of the Chiricahua Apache," she announced, "daughter of Iron Cloud, granddaughter of she who speaks to eagles. I am no one's savage." Her words rang across the valley with the weight of history. Even Rowan's men shifted uncomfortably, faced with a reality more complex than their simple narratives allowed. "I killed a man who tried to rape me," Nayeli continued. "I escaped from men who wanted to hang me for sport. I survived because the Firebird carried me above their hatred." She stepped forward, and several soldiers raised their rifles, but she showed no fear, only the terrible dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "If you want to kill me, Major, then do it," she said. "But know that my daughter will grow up knowing you murdered her mother for the crime of refusing to die when it was convenient for you." Elena chose that moment to reach out toward the soldiers, her small hand opening and closing in the universal gesture of infant curiosity. The sight of the child broke something in the tense silence. One of the younger soldiers lowered his rifle slightly. Another looked away entirely. Even Rowan seemed momentarily uncertain. Jack seized the moment of hesitation. Your men have families. Major, he said quietly. Children of their own. Most likely. Ask them if they want to be remembered as the men who orphaned a 2-year-old girl. For a long moment, the only sound was wind through the pines and Elena's soft babbling. The fate of 3 lives hung in the balance, decided by the conscience of armed men far from home. Then Rowan's face hardened again, duty overcoming doubt. Sergeant Williams, he ordered, take the woman and child into custody. Kill the man if he resists. But Sergeant Williams, a grizzled veteran of too many frontier campaigns, made no move to obey. Instead, he looked at his commanding officer with something approaching disgust. Sir, he said carefully, I've got daughters of my own. I didn't sign up to make orphans of babies. Other soldiers murmured agreement. The moral authority Rowan had counted on was crumbling before his eyes. This is mutiny, Rowan snarled, drawing his sidearm. I'll have you all court-martialed. But Williams just shook his head sadly. Major, with respect, the war's been over for years. Time we started acting like it. He turned his horse and began riding back toward the canyon entrance. One by one, the other soldiers followed. Their duty, they seemed to say, did not extend to murdering families for the sake of one man's obsession. Soon only Rowan remained, his pistol still drawn but now aimed at a world that had moved beyond his understanding. His authority had evaporated like morning mist. All his years of pursuit had led to this moment of complete isolation. Jack lowered his rifle, recognizing defeat when he saw it. It's over, Major, he said gently. Go home to your own family. Make peace with the choices you've made. For a moment, Rowan's finger tightened on the trigger. Rage and frustration warred in his expression. Then, slowly, he holstered his weapon. This isn't finished, he said, but the words lacked conviction. He was a man speaking to convince himself rather than others. Without another word, he wheeled his horse and rode after his departed men. The sound of hoofbeats faded into distance, leaving behind only the whisper of wind and the gurgle of running water. Jack and Naomi stood together on their porch, Elena between them like a bridge to the future. The crisis had passed, but more than that, something fundamental had shifted in the world around them. Do you think he'll come back? Naomi asked. Jack considered the question seriously. No, he decided finally. A man like Rowan can't survive without the respect of his men. Today broke something in him that won't heal. He was right. Major Rowan would resign his commission within the month, disappearing into the anonymity of a continent that was rapidly leaving his kind of frontier justice behind. The family returned to their cabin as sunset painted the canyon walls golden red. Elena toddled between her parents, chattering in her mixture of languages about the exciting visitors who had come to see them. That night, Naomi added new details to a drawing she had been working on. Not the Firebird this time, but a family portrait sketched in charcoal on smooth wood. A man, a woman, and a child, standing together against whatever storms might come. We are safe now, she said as Jack banked the fire for the night. Safer, he corrected with a smile. There's no such thing as completely safe, but we have each other, and that's enough. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in the darkness, night hunters called to their mates. Life continued its eternal cycle, indifferent to human struggles but somehow blessed by human love. In the cabin, 3 hearts beat in peaceful rhythm. The Firebird had finally found its nest, and the flames that had once threatened to destroy now warmed a family that represented hope itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to rise above the hatred that had shaped their past. But tonight, they were simply Jack, Naomi, and Elena, 3 souls who had found each other across the vast divide of a continent, learning to heal. The Firebird's wings sheltered them all, carrying them higher toward whatever dreams the future might hold. And so ended one chapter in the great story of the American West, not with gunfights or glory, but with the quiet triumph of love over hatred, understanding over ignorance, family over fear. In a land that often seemed to worship violence, 3 people had chosen a different path. They had proven that even in the harshest wilderness, kindness could take root and flourish. But what about your story? What dreams are you chasing tonight? What bridges are you building between different worlds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this tale moved you, remember to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because here at WestDream Tales, we believe the best adventures aren't found in the past, they're the ones we create together, one choice at a time. Until next time, keep chasing the dreams of the West.